Welcome back, beloved soul. This is the fifth reflection in our Pillars of Character series, a journey into the virtues that shape not only our faith, but the way we live, love, and walk alongside one another. Today, we turn toward compassion, not as sentiment or impulse, but as a strength guided by wisdom. This reflection invites us to look beyond rescuing, beyond control, and into a form of mercy that honors dignity, discernment, and the sacred responsibility we hold toward one another. Settle in now.
The road between Jerusalem and Jericho was not built for the faint of heart. It wound downward through rock and shadow, descending more than 3,000 feet in a span of 17 miles, curving through ravines where even the wind seemed to pause before entering. Travelers who had walked it more than once knew its reputation. They called it the Way of Blood, not for any violence committed by design, but for the violence the land itself seemed to invite. The sun was already past its height when Eliab set out from the city gates. He had business in Jericho, dealings with a merchant who owed him payment for a shipment of dyed wool. The sum was not insignificant. Eliab had borrowed against it to cover a debt of his own, and the pressure of that obligation rested like heat beneath his tunic. He moved quickly, perhaps too quickly, keeping his eyes forward, trusting the hour and the road and the rhythm of his own feet. He did not see them until it was too late. They came from a fold in the rock, 3 of them moving with the patience of men who had done this before. They did not shout, they did not threaten. They simply surrounded him, stripped him of his garments, took his sandals and his coin purse and the small knife he carried for cutting bread. When he resisted, they struck him. When he fell, they struck him again. And when he stopped moving altogether, they left him in the dust at the edge of the road, half alive and wholly exposed. Time became uncertain. The sky moved overhead in fragments, blue and white and impossibly far. Eliab heard sounds, the rustle of wind through dry scrub, the distant cry of a bird, the shuffling of his own breath. He tried to speak, but his lips would not form words. He tried to rise, but his body had become a stranger to him, heavy and unresponsive, answering to laws he no longer understood. He was not a man given to prayer. His faith was real but practical, woven into the fabric of his days rather than spoken aloud. Yet in that moment, stripped of everything that had once defined him, he found himself reaching inward, not with words, but with something deeper, a need, a longing, a cry from a place beneath language. And then he heard footsteps. Mathan had left Jerusalem earlier that morning, traveling with a small group of fellow scholars before parting ways at the junction where the road split toward the southern villages. He was a teacher of the law, a man of moderate reputation and careful learning, respected in his community, not for brilliance, but for steadiness. He kept the commandments. He honored the Sabbath. He tithed with precision and prayed with discipline. His robes were clean, his beard trimmed, his sandals repaired with thread dyed the same color as the leather so that no patch would show. He walked alone now, reciting passages under his breath, preparing for a teaching he would deliver in 3 days' time. The words were familiar, worn smooth by repetition, and they filled the silence of the road like water filling a cup. Then he saw the body. At first, he thought it was a dead man. The stillness, the nakedness, the dark stains spreading beneath the figure all suggested a death already completed. Mathan slowed his steps, his heart quickening despite his composure. He looked left and right, scanning the ridgeline for movement, for shapes that did not belong. He saw nothing. He heard nothing. But the road was quiet in a way that felt wrong, a silence that held its breath. He stood perhaps 20 paces from the body. close enough to see the rise and fall of the chest, close enough to know the man was not dead, close enough to feel the pull of obligation and the weight of risk. Mathan was not a cruel man. He did not despise the wounded or delight in suffering, but he was cautious by nature, and caution had kept him alive on roads like this before. He thought of the law, of the requirements surrounding contact with blood, of the uncertainty about whether the man was Jew or Gentile, clean or unclean. He thought of his journey, of his obligations, of the teaching that awaited him in 3 days' time. He thought of his family, of his students, of the life that depended on his return. And he thought, faintly and with shame, that perhaps someone else would come. He crossed to the far side of the road, kept his eyes forward, and walked on. He did not look back. He told himself it was wisdom. He told himself it was necessary. He told himself many things in the hours that followed, and each of them was true in part and incomplete in whole. But the image stayed with him, the outline of a man lying in the dust, and it would stay with him for years. The sun moved lower. The shadows lengthened. Eliab drifted between waking and sleep, between awareness and absence, his body growing cold, even as the stone beneath him held the heat of the day. He no longer knew where he was. He no longer remembered why he had come. He knew only that he was alone, and that the alone was growing deeper. Then he heard footsteps again. Shalem had been traveling since dawn. He carried little with him, a water skin, a small pouch of coins, a bundle of cloth for trade, and a flask of oil mixed with wine for wounds. The flask was old, inherited from his father, who had learned its use from a healer in the hill country. Shalem had used it twice before, once on a child who had fallen from a donkey, and once on himself, when a thorn had opened his arm during harvest. He was a Samaritan, which in this land meant he was an outsider. The Jews did not share meals with his people. They did not use the same vessels. They did not acknowledge the same temple or the same priests. Shalem had long ago stopped resenting this. It was simply the shape of the world, a boundary as fixed as the mountains and as old as the stories that divided them. He saw the body from a distance and did not look away. He approached slowly, not from fear but from attention. He studied the ground, the angle of the sun, the pattern of the wounds. He knelt beside the man and touched his neck, feeling for the pulse beneath the skin. It was there, faint but present, a thread of life still holding. Shalem did not speak. He did not announce his intentions or declare his virtue. He simply began. He poured water over the man's face gently, watching the dust run off in thin streams. He cleaned the wound on the forehead, then the gash along the ribs, and the scrapes on the knees and elbows. He worked with the steadiness of a man who had done this before, not rushing, not hesitating, simply attending to what was before him. The oil and wine from his flask he applied sparingly, pressing the cloth against each wound and holding it there until the bleeding slowed. The wine would sting, he knew. The oil would soothe. Together, they would give the body what it needed to begin its own healing. Eliab stirred beneath his hands. His eyes opened, unfocused and afraid, and for a moment he struggled, not recognizing the face above him, not understanding the touch that held him. Shalem did not restrain him. He did not speak sharply or demand stillness. He simply waited, his hands open, his posture calm, allowing the man to return to himself at his own pace. When Eliab finally stilled, when his breath slowed and his eyes focused, Shalem spoke for the first time. "You are safe. You are injured, but not beyond mending. I will take you to a place where you can rest." Eliab said nothing. He could not. But something in his face softened, a gratitude too deep for language, a recognition of presence in the midst of absence. Shalem lifted him carefully, bearing the weight across his own shoulders, and began the slow walk toward the inn at the base of the descent. The inn was modest, a stone building with a courtyard for animals, and a row of small rooms along the eastern wall. The innkeeper was a man named Tobias, older and practical, who had seen many travelers and many stories pass through his doors. He did not ask questions when Shalem arrived with the wounded man. He simply led them to a room in the back, one with a low bed and a window that faced the morning. Shalem laid Eliab on the bed and tended to him through the evening, changing the dressings, giving him water, speaking quietly when the man grew restless. He did not sleep. He did not leave. He stayed as a shepherd stays with a lamb that has wandered into danger, not because he owns it, but because it is alive and in need. In the morning, Shalem found Tobias in the courtyard and pressed 2 denarii into his hand. "This man needs time to heal," Shalem said. "Let him stay until he can walk again. Let him eat from your table and drink from your well. If it costs more, I will repay you when I return." Tobias looked at the coins, then at Shalem, then at the door behind which the wounded man lay sleeping. "You do not know him," Tobias said. It was not a question. "No," Shalem said, "I do not." "Then why?" Shalem considered the question. He was not a man of many words, and he did not reach for explanations easily. But after a moment he answered, simply and without adornment, "Because he was there, and because I could." Tobias nodded slowly, the way a man nods when he has heard something he did not expect, but cannot argue against. He pocketed the coins and turned back toward the courtyard. Shalem lingered at the door for a moment. He did not enter the room again. He did not wake Eliab to say farewell or to receive thanks. He simply stood in the threshold, watching the steady rise and fall of the man's breathing, and then he turned and walked out into the morning light. He had done what could be done. The rest was not his to carry. This is the shape of compassion rightly ordered. It does not demand recognition. It does not cling to outcomes. It does not confuse mercy with control or tenderness with possession. It enters the suffering of another without dominating it. It offers what is needed without erasing what remains. The scriptures speak of this with quiet clarity. In the Gospel of Luke, chapter 10, beginning at verse 33, we are told that a certain Samaritan came where the wounded man was, and when he saw him, he had compassion on him, and went to him, and bound up his wounds, pouring in oil and wine, and set him on his own beast, and brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day, when he departed, he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper, and said unto him, "Take care of him, and whatsoever thou spendest more, when I come again, I will repay thee." Notice what is present in this account. Notice the cost. The Samaritan gave of his own oil and wine. He used his own animal for transport. He paid from his own purse. He made himself responsible, not for the man's entire future, but for the immediate crisis that threatened his life. He did not demand gratitude. He did not linger to receive praise. He did not insist on overseeing every stage of recovery. He trusted the innkeeper to continue the work and promised to return if more was needed. This is compassion with structure. This is mercy with restraint. This is love that gives without possessing. But notice also what is absent. The Samaritan did not ask how the man came to be on that road. He did not inquire about debts or decisions, or the sequence of choices that led to this moment. He did not lecture. He did not withhold care until he had assessed worthiness. The man was wounded. The man was dying. That was enough. And yet the account does not suggest that compassion ignores consequence. It does not teach us that mercy requires blindness, or that love must abandon discernment. There is a wisdom thread woven through the whole of Scripture, and it speaks to the danger of rescue without limit, of care that repeats without effect, of kindness that becomes a prison for both giver and receiver. The book of Proverbs, chapter 19 and verse 19, offers this caution. "A man of great wrath shall suffer punishment, for if thou deliver him, yet thou must do it again." The language is direct. There are patterns of destruction that cannot be undone by intervention alone. There are wounds that are self-inflicted and self-renewed, and the one who rescues without understanding may find themselves trapped in a cycle that multiplies harm rather than healing. This is not a call to withhold compassion. It is a call to offer it wisely. It is an invitation to see clearly, to act deliberately, and to love in ways that honor the agency of the one who suffers. True compassion does not treat another person as an object to be fixed. It does not reduce them to a problem to be solved. It enters their suffering as a presence, not a power. It walks beside them without dragging them. It offers a hand without closing a fist. Shalem understood this in some wordless way. He gave what could be given. He trusted what could be trusted. And he left space for Eliab to rise on his own feet and return to his own life. If this way of seeing compassion resonates with you, consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. In the days that followed, Eliab began to heal. The wounds closed slowly. The pain softened. He slept long hours and woke to the sound of the courtyard, the braying of donkeys, the murmur of travelers passing through. Tobias brought him bread and broth. He did not hover. He did not ask for payment beyond what Shalem had already given. He simply attended to the work of hospitality, offering presents without intrusion. On the fourth day, Eliab sat upright for the first time. On the fifth, he stood. On the sixth, he walked to the courtyard and stood in the light, feeling the sun on his face as though he had never felt it before. He asked Tobias about the man who had brought him. Tobias told him what he knew, which was not much. A Samaritan, a traveler, a man who had done what needed doing and then moved on. Eliab was quiet for a long time. He had known Samaritans before, had passed them in the market, had avoided their gaze the way his people had taught him to do. He had believed certain things about them, things absorbed without question, things he had never examined because they had never mattered. Now they mattered. He did not feel gratitude in the simple sense. Gratitude was too small a word for what moved in him. It was something closer to recognition, a seeing of what had always been there, but had never been visible. The man who saved him was supposed to be his enemy. The men who passed him were supposed to be his brothers. And yet, he began the journey home a week later, walking slowly, stopping often, letting his body set the pace. He did not recover the money he had come for. He did not pursue the merchant who owed him. He simply walked, one step at a time, back toward the life he had left behind. And somewhere along the road, in a place where the path curved through shadow and light, he stopped and looked back at the distance he had traveled. He thought of the man who had knelt beside him. He thought of the hands that had cleaned his wounds. He thought of the silence in which compassion had arrived, not with speeches or performances, but with oil and wine and presence. And he understood, perhaps for the first time, that mercy was not a debt to be repaid. It was a pattern to be continued. It was not about him at all. It was about the next man lying in the dust, and the one after that, and the one after that. He turned and walked on. There is another image in Scripture that speaks to this pattern of compassion. In the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 9 and verse 36, we are told that when Jesus saw the multitudes, he was moved with compassion on them, because they fainted and were scattered abroad as sheep not having a shepherd. This is not pity in the diminishing sense. This is not condescension dressed in concern. This is a seeing that enters the condition of the other without losing clarity. Jesus looked at the crowds and did not see a problem to be managed. He saw people who were lost, not because they were foolish or wicked, but because they had no one to guide them. They were not objects of sentiment. They were souls in need of shepherding. A shepherd does not carry every sheep forever. A shepherd leads. A shepherd guards. A shepherd walks ahead and calls and trusts the flock to follow. There is tenderness in this, but there is also structure. There is care, but there is also direction. Compassion rightly ordered looks like this. It sees the wound and tends it. It sees the need and meets it, but it does not see the person as permanently incapable. It does not assume that help must continue without end, or that love requires the erasure of consequence. It honors agency. It restores capacity. It returns the other to their own feet and trusts them to walk. This is harder than it sounds. The impulse to rescue is powerful. The desire to be needed is subtle and strong. There is a form of care that looks generous, but is actually possessive, a way of helping that keeps the other dependent, a kindness that quietly diminishes. Consider a moment from our own time. A woman sits across from a struggling friend, listening to a familiar story of repeated mistakes and mounting consequences. The friend has heard this story before. She has offered advice before. She has intervened before. And now she feels the pull again, the urge to step in, to solve, to smooth the edges of a life that refuses to change. She opens her mouth to offer another solution, another plan, another rescue. And in doing so, she speaks over the very voice she thinks she is trying to help, assuming without asking, deciding without consulting, loving in a way that leaves no room for the other to rise. She does not see it. She believes she is being kind. This is the counterfeit. This is compassion sundered from wisdom. It means well. It intends good. And yet, it quietly erases the dignity of the one it claims to serve. Shalem did not do this. He gave what could be given. He left what needed to be left. He trusted Eliab to become himself again. Not a version shaped by dependence, not a shadow defined by rescue, but a man restored to his own path. And Eliab, in time, became that man. He returned to his village. He resumed his trade. He paid the debt that had driven him to the road in the first place, slowly and with effort, but on his own terms. He did not tell the story of the Samaritan often. It was too close, too strange, too difficult to explain to those who had not been there. But he carried it, and in small ways, in moments no one else would notice, he began to live differently. He paused when others hurried past. He listened when others looked away. He offered presence without demanding gratitude. He did not become a saint. He did not abandon his flaws or transcend his limitations. He remained human, which is to say incomplete, which is to say in need of grace himself. But something had shifted in him, a posture of the heart that had been knocked loose by violence and restored by compassion. He learned, in other words, the difference between being saved and being possessed. He learned that mercy does not require ownership. He learned that love, rightly ordered, gives without grasping and heals without controlling. And he learned that the road between Jerusalem and Jericho is not just a place on a map. It is a condition of the soul. It is the space between where we are and where we are meant to be. It is the descent into shadow, the vulnerability of the journey, the risk of every step we take. On that road, we are all wounded. On that road, we are all passers-by. On that road, we are all asked the same question over and over in ways we do not always recognize. Who is my neighbor? The answer is not a category. It is not a definition. It is not a boundary drawn to keep some in and others out. The answer is the person in front of you. The answer is the wound you can see. The answer is the need you have the power to meet. Not all needs, not every need, but this one. Here, now. And the question beneath the question is even more searching. Will I become a neighbor? Will I enter the suffering of another without needing to own it? Will I help without enabling? Will I love without erasing? Will I trust that compassion is not about me at all, but about the one who lies in the dust, and about the mercy that flows through us when we are willing to become its instrument? These are not questions that can be answered once. They return again and again in different forms, on different roads. And each time they return, we are given the chance to answer them anew. Shalem did not know any of this when he knelt beside Eliab. He did not think in terms of theology or principle. He simply saw. He simply acted. He simply loved in the way that love becomes real, through presence, through cost, through the willingness to be changed by what we witness. That is enough. That is everything. And somewhere, on a road we cannot see, the story continues. A man lies in the dust. A traveler approaches. A decision is made. What will it be? Thank you for walking with us through this reflection on compassion rightly ordered. If this story has stirred something in you, we invite you to like, comment, and subscribe. Your engagement helps others find these reflections, and your voice in the conversation reminds us all that we are not walking alone. Until next time, may you see clearly, love wisely, and hold gently what is not yours to possess.
Thank you for sharing this sacred story with me. If it touched your heart, you may also find peace and clarity in our Meditative Reflections playlist, a series of guided meditations inspired by these very Bible stories. Each one is crafted to help you slow down, breathe deeply, and connect more fully with God's presence in your life. Remember to subscribe, leave a comment if something resonated with you, and share this with someone who may need a little hope today. Until next time, transforming minds and empowering souls, and as always, peace, love, light, and unity.